And then these models show up and they can look at these deep linked different systems with all this history, right? Because we're effectively being able to analyze the full history of everything that's ever happened in all of these different systems. And so and the models are just like, yeah, found it. Uh,
Welcome to another episode of the Breakneck Podcast, where we talk with people building products and companies about what it's like to contend with a fast-changing world, with business models changing, company strategies changing, technology changing every week. And today we have the perfect person for the podcast, which is Adam Dahlgren, who is COO at Allstacks. Adam, why don't you introduce what Allstacks does and kind of what is your role in Allstacks?
Thrilled to be here. I'm Adam. I live in Austin, Texas. I am the COO, CPO of Allstacks. I've been doing it 7 years today, actually, which is
Whoa,
Congrats.
insane,
congrats.
right? A little insane. Product guy by background. I used to be in sort of high scale B2C, more e-commerce type stuff, marketplacey stuff. I was a fairly early employee over at a company called Living Social. Definitely was a moment in time, right? From like 2010 through 2014, big cresting wave of e-commerce stuff going on. Learned an incredible amount. I got more into data. I went into then to lead product for a vertical data company in the energy space for a while, and then I did some consulting. And as I was doing some consulting, mostly like Fortune 100 brand names that had gone through some transformation path, and they were usually fairly broken on the transformation path. And my friend and I, we'd drop in and do like just as much mindset consulting as anything else. Like, how do we think about products and how do we approach building in a new way? And as I was doing that, like seeing some pretty significant brokenness in these really big teams, I started to have this itch around, why can't we have the data to understand the nature of the brokenness, right? And that was for me the kernel for Allstacks. And so I was noodling on, how might I go about starting a company that would address that sort of like core kernel. And I complained enough about it to an investor friend of mine. He said, hey, it seems like you're pissed off enough about this problem space. There are these two guys I've been tracking coming out of Techstars here in Austin. I said, oh, that sounds really, really great. Maybe we should talk. He said, yeah, you got to meet them tomorrow because they are graduating and moving back to Raleigh. And so Hirsch and Jeremy caught them the day before they left, and I spent most of the next day with them. And a few months later, it was like formal. But that's kind of where I came from, and it really was out of, I was trending towards starting something on my own, and I just lucked into being introduced to these two guys who were also sort of churning on a similar topic.
So break down what Allstacks is doing, because I mean, I think I understand it, but I would butcher. I can't.
Yeah. So early Allstacks, right? The kind of formative outlook was as a leader of a really big technology team organization, I have way too much complexity across all the various tools that are being used to try to build software, or try to build software, as it were. Isn't there some signal inside of all those tools and teams and processes and whatnot, that if you could make sense of it, you could say, oh, here's our kind of benchmark. Here's where we are right now. Here's what we're shooting for. And then as these teams are usually employing people whose job it is to like, let's get better at building software, or you're using consultants or whatever, how do we know that we are actually trending toward better? And better has many different flavors. And early on, 7 and 8 years ago, we might have had a pretty rudimentary view of what better would be, right? More velocity. We need to tighten cycle times. We need to understand where the bottlenecks are, yada, yada, right? And that was the initial thinking, with some expectation of, right, new technologies becoming available, new implementations, meaning that we could do new awesome things with the data, but we just had to kind of get into that and learn. And so over time,
Yeah, I just looked it up. It's Gall's law is what the internet says that is. Is that any complex system that works started as a simple system that works? You don't get to start complex and then make it work. You either start simple and it works or you don't.
bingo, bingo.
Which I tend to
Uh,
agree with quite a
good.
bit.
We know there is brokenness in piecing together this information to figure out like how do I prove I'm getting better? I'm investing in the right place, right? And early on, it was less about where are you investing? It was more about just like, more factory minded, honestly, because you just had to start with the normal mechanics and then get some expertise on that
So like,
and then
what were
go
a
from
couple
there.
of early metrics that you tracked? It's you have like time to deploy. What are the metrics that you guys were tracking?
Yeah, like early on, it was let's understand like the kind of base characteristics of these organizations, right? So for a team, all the way down to the individual, although like the data would usually be rolled up to the team and to the organization level or portfolio level, right? Like, what are the delivery characteristics of our initiatives? What are the bottleneck areas across our series of systems, right? That that might stick out to us. And so if we're thinking like, oh, I've got a great handle on, my kind of project management processes, but I can never deploy anything. Well, that needs to be well understood. We need to isolate that. We need to, remove that bottleneck. It's like very kind of straightforward, kind of value stream thinking is sort of what we were talking about a lot of the time. And in terms of like a little bit of a technical layer in here, but what we've really done is we've interwoven these systems as though they're all in one, right? And we're not doing it through database snapshots and then like lookups amongst each of these. We are building living direct links between all the items. And where it becomes really relevant for AI territory is these models love data structured in the way that we have now managed to structure this data over all these years. And so we're very, very fortunate that as these advances started to come, now we can learn crazy stuff really fast from data that is built and structured in that way. And so now, with a seat at the table, and these conversations with the bigger companies, a proper sort of ICP approach. I love to talk about S&P 493 plus the Russell 2000 plus the next 5,000 biggest customers, right? Like that's an amazing place for us. Um, and they have piles of data. They have many different systems. They have mega complexity. And so being able to go in and have a perspective, go in and say, I'm gonna help you get some clarity on what is right now. We have advanced significantly into a place where we're increasingly centering the conversation on you had an expectation, Mr. or Mrs. CIO, CTO, portfolio owner, et cetera. You were investing in A, B, and C. Those were your key things. You had to have those. Here's where your actual time and money went. And we talk about this like investment actuals until we turn blue in the face. And then we talk about the implication of the mismatch between those two things, between their expectation and their reality.
Yeah, you reminded me, I was watching a video on the signals intelligence, the electronic intelligence gathered by fleets of swarms of planes. Like you have these new planes coming out, the F-47, the B-21. And a big change is that now all of these things are networked. One of the biggest uses for AI in the military is if you look at all of the correlations across all these data sets, AI is really good at finding anomalies. So if you're looking for a stealth plane or you're looking at trying to identify a plane based on its electronic signature, it might be switching around really fast and randomly, and you're able to reconstruct. No, that plane is still there. It's the same plane. It's doing these, and we can jam it in this way. So it's this increasingly.
Dude, your analogy is so perfect. This was not pre-planned for the audience, right? Like we spent a bunch of years the hard way, right? Talking about management by exception, talking about like, let's be able to identify those things that are anomalous. Let's understand very quickly, like time to that value is super important, right? But let's very quickly understand the nature of that outlier, that difference, And then let's get a really good sense of like, is that on like a path that's going to start to repeat? Can we isolate it? What is the nature of that risk? And then, we did that kind of in the difficult, let's get all that data, let's build the control plane to kind of do that. And then these models show up and they can look at these deep linked different systems with all this history, right? Because we're effectively being able to analyze the full history of everything that's ever happened in all of these different systems. And so and the models are just like, yeah, found it. Uh, like, like it turns out there is so much signal.
Yeah. Do you ever find yourself having a conversation with a customer who kind of like sheepishly says something like, well, do you think you could ever do this? And it used to be something that would have taken, I used to be a data scientist, like it would have taken a year. It would have been
Yes.
insane. And you're like, actually, that's like, I just need to change the prompt slightly, or I need to change this. It just comes out for free.
Putting a finer point on it, there are two things that are in production that are being used by customers now that were like funny, haha. Oh, someday, back in like 2021, me and Hirsch and Jeremy saying to each other, on the like vision stuff, I imagine like if we can get 100 engineers to work on like a couple of these projects for enough time, not 100, but if you could put 20 dedicated onto it, right? Whatever, I don't know. Maybe we could solve that kind of problem. And now it's just like those things just exist. We had four distinct I'll just call them like tests, experiments, where I was saying to our board and to the internal folks, like, it feels like we're likely to hit at least two of these, right? And then all four worked, So then you have this like awesome problem of, well, okay, you kind of have to, you can't just send it on all four thoughtfully. You need to pick and choose a kind of some sequencing of it. We're not a giant
But
company,
as
so.
as a as a head of product, that's an interesting challenge. All of a sudden, you have more velocity, which is what we all want. But where does the bottleneck show up now, or even maybe more broadly? Let me ask the question: How, as a head of product, how are you re-architecting or adjusting the way you approach kind of roadmap and doing all the product stuff, given you've got this great velocity now?
I mean, I feel like what the first thing we did, and this is more of a credit to um, Graham on my team, who's our kind of day-to-day product leader, and Jim, our VP of engineering. But they went and they were just like, these teams can be very small, right? Like, let's even for a small company already, let's make sure we size down the teams. Like they can just be paired up folks. You don't need very many hands in each one. And what we first did was we actually did learn to walk, chew gum, tie our shoes, fix our glasses all at the same time. Like we were just able to do more in parallel. Which to me, that's like a huge step change. Again, like we're a startup. I'm watching this happen at big companies. That's fairly astonishing, where it is just more viable to have more things parallelized. I would say that what we then observe, not just for us, maybe to a more limited degree for us, but in our customer base, is then like getting things live all the way stood up in a defensible manner in production. That becomes the major focus area for folks. And I think like the gaze is kind of swinging toward that significantly right now.
One of the things that I think a lot of people are talking about right now is that smaller team size. A lot of people have become fixated on a one-person company selling for $1 billion, which I have a problem with.
Yeah.
Just get a secretary. Get someone to bring you lunch. Like you could have two people at the company. It would be, no one's gonna knock you for not picking your own lunch up. It sounds like you're busy, but okay.
Agree.
Having a smaller team, how do you feel like it's changing the culture of your company? Because I think there was, no one spoke kindly of being a feature factory, but in the say 2015, that's what companies were supposed to be. You had a big backlog of features, just knock out these features as fast as you can, productivity, throughput. And now, like what you're talking about is having these much more dynamic small groups of people who are doing a lot of different things at once. And maybe most of the limitation comes from customer implementation, not from actually developing the technology. So what are you getting? How has your team changed
Yeah.
in terms of how they talk about their job and how they think about their career and all that?
Well, this is a really good question. So I think like, for brand new 0 to 1 kind of upstarts, it's a different thing where it's like, yeah, you really can just send so many more different capabilities much faster. In a world where, you've actually built a customer base, have a company that's operating, you're on the kind of growth trajectory. For us, our reality has been the advent of these AI, these model capabilities, um, means that we actually might be able to consolidate entire layers of ourselves into a much more enjoyable experience, right? You can kind of just squash a bunch of different capabilities that, and don't get me wrong, like these are things that the market would have demanded, that customers are using, but they're like discrete, right? For reasons within these organizations. I think the most exciting thing for us is, okay, we can have more streams of work happening. They can be explicitly AI features or AI enabled features. They can converge back into our platform, into our application, and then condense, squash, limit surface area that users even need to touch and toil over, right? Because every square foot you have is risk, really, right? And so I think some of the promise for like existing companies is how, if you go AI first, if you push really hard on let's upend ourselves as much as possible, then you get to reimagine some of the experience. And then, for us, it means what we think about more than anything else is being a data company first, right? Because that's ultimately what we're doing, right? We are weaving together all these systems to bring the insight, and we're
Yeah,
doing some very
I mean,
novel
just to
things to
take a
it.
couple things that you've said so far in the conversation, which is you started the company because there were so many different systems and people weren't coordinating and synthesizing the connections between these systems. And then as AI comes, it's a continuation of that process of like, hey, there's fewer places to log in. There's fewer things that you need to understand about Allstacks to use it. There's fewer concepts, there's fewer web pages, there's fewer app screens. And like you said, surface area is both hard to maintain, and then also you have to educate every new user on all this different stuff you'd rather not. And that's one of the experiences we've had, is just, it's not so much that having a robot talk to you like it's a human being is that transformative, but the fact that it's the same for every different feature you have is tremendous.
The consistency that you can start to offer is amazing. Absolutely. Yeah. And then I would just say for us, I wouldn't even characterize us into like the full blown like drive, just the consistency and, doesn't that feel good? We're in the go and surprise people with like things that they didn't expect you to be able to uncover, that they didn't have to work for, that now they can go fix, or now they can go, communicate and get out ahead of. That is outright surprising, right? Like it's upside surprise stuff.
Internally within the business. So we've a couple of minutes there kind of on the product side of things. You talked about changing the org structure a little bit. Like culturally, have you guys had to go through a lot of change of like, what the heck is this? What are we going to do with it? How do we speak to the team about it?
Our engineers jumped out ahead of us on this. What happened was we had our semi-annual all hands, and the engineering team basically just came to us on fire with ideas, and said, and they sort of said, all credit goes to them, because they were the ones who sort of showed the tone to the rest of the company that then got such significant buy-in in a very natural way, that it didn't feel like myself or Hirsch or Graham on our team needed to go and like issue some edict and, hey, there's a roadmap change that is the embrace of AI. Certainly we were saying like there are things we're planning and there's a bunch coming on that topic, but then we ended up in this all hands, and the engineering team itself said, hey, we have way more that we've already figured out is possible, and we need to send it. And then we were able to get into that, like, let's get on our toes and go, right? Like, and that was an
Yeah.
amazing, important thing for us.
You talked about mindset consulting, and I've had lots of conversations with you about how things should be. I mean, that was maybe our first conversation ever, was just like, how should things be? And we were just like completely aligned. But when you talk about mindset, I, I'll prompt you with a a statement. We'll see how you respond. There are companies where people will benefit from going faster, and clearly Allstacks, your engineers saying, hey, we want to take all the things that we work on and own, completely rip them out and completely change them, and here's the new thing. I've been in organizations that were pretty young, and I've seen instances where people were started to get defensive of their tech stack or their technology. And here's the statement. There are some companies where people will benefit from going faster with AI, or taking that step into this brand new world. And there are some where they won't. And it's actually pretty easy to start going through and analyzing the conditions where, say, an internal product team would benefit from adopting AI, or they would pretty quickly obviously lose their jobs. And so they would have just that moment of doubt that stops them from, like you said, that weekend project and like that excitement. It's like, you know what? I'm going to wait for the CEO to come down with that, because I can see pretty quickly how it'd be out in the labor pool.
Twofold, talking about big companies, the co-pilots, cursors, Claude code itself, plus MCP, plus the agents, right? It really does make it so you can do a whole lot more, better, etc. It does. That is hard to traffic, and so that does mean there, from an engineering, kind of pipelines perspective, you need to have a close eye on where the new bottlenecks will be created. But there is an insane amount of possibility that exists in these big companies as they implement these things. I think for folks who are saying like that's not going to work, that's a bad bet. It's a bad bet. I wouldn't be on that side of it. What it does do, like pragmatically, is it means, okay, now we end up with more that can be trafficked in that development phase. We need to make sure we can actually get it into production, that it is properly tested. I think that the testing and validation stuff is like super interesting times right now. And then as that gets kind of like, I'll just assume like handled, which is a huge assumption, but let's, jump into the product phase. Then so much swings up into like, where are we pointing our people? Because actually it is a huge risk to have everybody going a lot faster and picking up the next thing and picking up the next thing when the next thing to be picked up is not the right thing. And so there's a huge risk for not having a good plan on that front. It is
Yeah,
the simplest way I can put it.
You constantly use the term bottleneck, which for me is like, I'm always, and again, I know how you think, but like whenever I hear bottleneck, I think about theory of constraints, the goal, those types of books, where it's like you really can't think about your company in a static way anymore. You have to think about it as a chain of value. You have to really understand what value you're providing for your customers, and you really have to constantly reevaluate what are the blockers? What are the blockers? What are our key things? And there's so many times where, we just sit down and then we're so excited about this brand new thing we need to build. And then the answer is not building that. It's just, no, you don't have enough customers right now. You need a bigger pipeline, go work on marketing. And it's like, oh, but I want to go play with the tech. And keeping the whole organization focused on, no, we need to make this easier to adopt, or we need to make sure that we get adoption of this existing tool before we move on is challenging, because it's fun. It's fun to build stuff.
I think the premium gets put on then decision velocity and decision fidelity. Like how thoughtful are we about the decisions we're making in terms of what direction are we running? Because there are some, it is a relatively fair assumption that we can run faster, generally speaking, at least within the kind of development phase. And there's a lot of opportunity for technology implementations, technology approaches to help shore up the kind of direction of travel, I think.
I was just going to ask you, as you kind of abstract up one more level even from that, and you think about Allstacks as a business, but more generally, all of us, the product for young businesses is kind of the engine, right? You're constantly like, oh, if we could just add this, if we could just do that, we could do, and like the marketing, the salespeople are waiting for you to have that thing. And now we're in a world where, as you said, larger companies even are kind of building up inventory of early processes and concepts. So as a business, as you run the business as a CEO, is this sort of focus of your attention shifting a little bit, like a little bit less on the kind of output side on the product and maybe more to other parts of it, or no?
So we are super committed to our like kind of core thesis, which is let's make sure that key stakeholder for the software team, it could be a CIO, CTO, VP of engineering, the portfolio owner, right, of the delivery side, a business unit leader who sort of has a P&L with development that rolls up to them. Let's make sure they really know where their time and money is being directed so that they can course correct, and that so that the implications of any bottlenecks that do exist or any inefficiencies that do exist that they need to solve, they can get out ahead of those, and then they have the tools to solve them. Like, we're super focused on talking about that specific message first. And then what happens when we're talking with those senior leaders, they might say things like, and they're saying things increasingly like, feed this data back to me in this other place, right? Go augment this other data feed in these other ways. It all goes back to like, they honestly often don't care about your application specifically. They care about how you are making sense of this complex stuff, the data, the process, the people, and then what solutions, what sort of like decision improvements you can bring them. And so lots of the conversations are going back to that for me right now.
Brilliant. Well, Adam, thank you very much for being so generous with your time. We like to wrap these things up with a very quick question. You might not have an answer for this, don't worry, but stuff is happening so quickly in AI land. Anything, and maybe Matt and Adam, I'll open up to both of you. Anything that kind of came across your desk this week from an AI perspective where you're like, oh my goodness, that was whatever, insert word, crazy, notable, disturbing.
I'm always caught off guard by this, Adam. I had one prompted, like set up the Alpha Genome. So the Google DeepMind released Alpha Genome, which is just, they've shown that the techniques related to AI, and I'm not exactly sure how they're related to LLMs or how they're related to the previous work they did with like AlphaGo or anything like that.
Right.
But essentially throwing like a gigantic amount of GPUs with some reinforcement learning or something, it can actually make a bunch of progress on genetics and looking at genetic expression. And again, finding those connections between genes and phenotypes and expressions of things. So it's been this holy grail for a long time to be able to figure out how different molecules will interact, because it's going to unlock all kinds of insane things. Obviously, genetics and medicine, where we're in a golden age, they're going to just cure obesity. All that work you've put into staying skinny, no one's going to care anymore. You're just going to be able to take a drug. They're going to solve cardiovascular disease, like for the most part, it looks like in the next few years. I think is actually looking like it's going to translate into huge advances in medicine. And then once you get into the physical world, I'm an old physicist, the ability to calculate, for instance, catalysts and things that will speed up chemical reactions. It's just going to be transformative for society. And so I think we're focused on like, how do we improve B2B, throughput and stuff like that. And I'm going to stay there. I do like that part of the world, but I think probably bigger things are happening elsewhere with the same set of GPUs that we're currently using to, generatively produce reports on data or stuff.
Look, I think that those of us who've been doing the kind of B2B or B2C, SaaS stuff for long enough, we've thrown out there like, hey, everyone, we are not, at the end of the day, we are not curing cancer, right?
But they're literally doing it. Yeah, I kind of need it though, because I like, honestly, more and more, it's not even a single thing. Since COVID, maybe, it's just you throw your hands up and like, just can it just slow down? But I do feel there's some real rays of sunshine poking through the clouds now. Ian, what's yours for the week?
Well, you guys have gone high end, but I've gone almost existential here in the sense that I was super excited about Anthropic's Project Vend. Did you guys see that?
I thought it was a little silly.
I thought it was great. So
It's a very fun thing, though. Yeah.
Yeah. So for those folks who didn't see it, Anthropic basically gave Claude control of a vending machine business, and so snacks can be pretty important to people. But if you didn't see that, I encourage people to have a look at it. Pretty hilarious stuff.
The headline. I'll give away the headline since this is a podcast. We're going to summarize stuff. They didn't control what people could order, so people started ordering tungsten cubes, which I've never held a tungsten cube, but apparently it's a very dense metal.
Very heavy.
It's an exhilarating experience to hold a tungsten cube in your hand. And so it ordered up a vending machine worth of these very expensive tungsten material. It lost a huge amount of money. Nobody else bought the tungsten cubes from the machine. So that was the end of it. But a good experiment.
All right. Well, thank you, Adam. Thank you, Matt. We'll land it there.
Really appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Bye-bye.